All right, Toastmasters, I have no idea which envelope I'm going to pick this morning. So this is a challenge that I am faced with this morning because of my mentor, Paul. I was on vacation with him and I said, Paul, I have no idea what I'm going to speak about next week. He said, why don't you just do an impromptu speech? So I did some research online and I realized 5 subjects. So I'm going to pick one of the 5. I have no idea what I'm going to speak about, but I will attempt to talk about Antonio's life. Who is Antonio? Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, most honored guest. Antonio was a gentleman that I met 6 years ago in Mexico. The reason I met Antonio is I decided to go to a prison in Mexico to visit another inmate that was sentenced to a crime that he had nothing to do with. His name was Pastor Nacho. And we thought, that's a funny name, Pastor Nacho. Well, we entered that prison, and in fact, Paul and Debbie went with us that day. And we got to meet Pastor Nacho. We had met him a year and a half prior at an outreach. He was preaching. He had a ministry going on, but it was an outdoor ministry to the very poorest part of Mexico. And we really enjoyed his service. But my job that day was to cut oranges. Because I asked him, what can I do? And he said, if you could just help me cut some oranges, we'd like to hand them out after service. So I did so. And then a year and a half had gone by, and we had found out that Nacho was put in prison. So we visited him. And it's a prison like you've never seen before. There was almost 480 inmates in that prison. That prison is located 4 hours from where we're standing right now. We had such a great time in that prison. The reason I say that is because it's a large courtyard. And all these inmates, most of them, will make something and they'll try to sell it to you. In fact, we walked out of there with a lot of items that we had purchased that day. But they had an outdoor service. They were playing a guitar, they had an amplifier, they were singing. And again, this prison had 485 inmates. And it's only designed for 130 inmates. So try to imagine 10 inmates to a cell that only should have 2. We felt really sorry for these guys because it was so sad to find out that they slept on the floor. 10 in a row. So try to imagine this person having to go to the bathroom at 2 o'clock in the morning has to step over all these other inmates. That's the stories we heard that day. Now, Pastor Nacho, after many years of going in and out of that prison, got out 2 years ago. He was sentenced to 4.5 years for a crime that he never committed. In fact, the judge wanted $6,000 to drop the case. And the churches in Rocky Point all gathered the $6,000. And he turned it down. He said, no, I'm not guilty. I can't take that money because if I take that money and give it to him as a bribe, it shows that I'm guilty. So he chose to spend the 4.5 years in prison. So we would go back every 4 to 6 weeks. We would bring candy. We'd bring toilet paper. We would bring toothpaste. We would bring whatever these guys needed. In fact, we did a shoe drive. We need sneakers. And we did a shoe drive online, collected 850 pair of shoes. Most of them were new. Well, he got out, and we got to meet Antonio. Antonio was just another inmate. But he got his pastoral license while being in prison. Now, understand, he got sentenced to 27 years, and he was there for 6 years before they even sentenced him. We fell in love with Antonio. We fell in love with his family. He had 2 little girls and a wife that lived very close to him. She was able to go back and forth, and to this day, she still goes back and forth every couple days to see him. And we support Antonio and his family. In fact, one day I said to Antonio, do they allow your wife to spend a night in here? And he says, yeah, they do. They have a special room. I said, what does that cost? He said, $35. I said, $35? 6 years, you've never had your wife spend a night here? He goes, no. I reached in my pocket, and before I handed him that $35, I said, Antonio, you better not get her pregnant. Well, guess what, folks? Not only did she get pregnant, she had twins. So the cost of living for me went up. And we have supported this family for the last 6 years. In fact, last year, Antonio had a vision of starting to dig something up. And he didn't know what it meant. He just had a dream to start digging. Well, you can imagine what that would be like in prison when you go to the warden and say, hey, I had this dream last night. I'm supposed to be digging. Yeah, right. Well, it turns out that he did start digging with 6 other inmates. And the reason they started digging is to build a new church inside the prison, which has never happened in the history of Mexico, to build a Christian church inside a prison. And in 4 months, that church was built from a dirt, sandy ground to a beautiful church today. In fact, the last minute of putting in that church, somebody donated a 5-ton AC unit. Now, there's no AC in a prison except in that church. So now when we show up, we're in a beautiful church. We've got air conditioning. We still bring lots of supplies. In fact, we bring so much supplies to these guys when we come down there that they actually open up these 30-foot gates and let us pull our car in. They don't even search the car. They don't even search Susie and I. They let us bring in our cell phones. We can bring in cameras. The new warden that just became the warden 2 weeks ago, which we met the day we were there, made a comment to us and said, you guys are welcome anytime you want to come into this prison, 24/7. It's been a challenge for Antonio. His sentence was dropped, and we thought he would be out April 1st. That was the agreement. He would be out April 1st. April 1st came and went, and he's still in prison. So we're in the process right now of helping him find an attorney, which we think we found an attorney, and we think that this attorney is going to do it at no charge. But regardless, Antonio, if you talk to him today, he's having a wonderful time because every 3 or 4 days they're having church service. The guys are coming in. By the way, the prison has gone from 485 inmates down to 70. Now again, it's designed for 130. So what did they do? They brought in 60 more inmates from other prisons. And we were able to meet some of those guys a few weeks back. And that church was full. It was pretty amazing how filled every seat in that church was. So Antonio is in my life, and now he's in your life. Mr. Toastmaster.